Welcome to the Art and Soul Podcast. I'm Alicia, your fellow dreamer and guide on this path of healing. This podcast is our sanctuary, a place where artists, creatives, and sensitive souls like you and me can come to recharge and find inspiration. You'll find tips and tools to help you on your awakening journey. Let's dive deep and discover the magic inside of us. Hello. Thank you all so much for joining me for this episode of the Art and Soul Podcast. I'm so happy you're here. I'm also really grateful to those of you that are every week listeners for giving me a little break this past week. I'll probably have more updates on why that was in a little while. It still feels too soon to talk about it right now, but I am just so grateful for those of you that reached out and said that you missed the podcast last week. That made me feel really good and just really valued. And it's so nice to know that people value the information that I'm sharing and are excited for the podcast every week. So thanks for saying something. But we've got some good stuff coming up today. So today we are talking all about the heart energy center, the heart chakra. And for those of you that are new listeners, or maybe you just picked this podcast episode out of a list that sounded good to you, I do recommend going back and starting with the episode on the root chakra. We're going through the whole energy system in the body each week and talking about the different elements of each energy center and why each one is important to your overall health and well-being. And I really believe that you kind of need to balance from the bottom up because the bottom is your foundation. So that root chakra, the sacral chakra, the solar plexus, all of those more primal, instinctual energy centers are really important to be balanced before we can start working with the heart and some of the more metaphysical, spiritual, etheric parts of our energy. So if you haven't, go check those out first and then come back to this episode. The heart chakra gets a lot of attention because we love love. We all love love. We love to feel loved. We love to belong. We enjoy being given love in our life. And in the spiritual community, for good reason, there is a lot of intention and focus put on the heart chakra. There is kind of an argument as to whether the heart or the third eye or the solar plexus is the most important chakra. And I would say that none of them are more important than the others. They are all equally important, all 7 of them, but really our entire alignment, even all of our minor chakras, are so important to really living in our truest form, in our freest self, in our most vulnerable state, in our most confident and passionate state, in our most authentic selves. To me, authenticity is the goal. To live in an authentic manner is when your energy body and your physical body are in full alignment with who you are and what your purpose is, with the earth and everyone around you, and with the universe, the divine, and everything that's out there. And to me, the heart center is where all of that converges. And I think that's why it gets so much attention. To live authentically is a balance between that lower half, the primal, instinctual aspects of the human experience, and the higher self, the spiritual aspects of the human experience. And the heart is right in the middle of all of that. The heart is basically a bridge between the physical, the instinctual, the animalistic, survival parts of us, that carnal part of us, and that etheric, metaphysical, spiritual, higher self. The heart center is where it all comes together. And so if this part is blocked in some way, if this part is shut down, nothing can flow. You may find yourself being a really spiritual person, but not able to connect to your body and to more of your primal needs. Or you may be a person who lives more in that survival part of you, and you're not able to access the higher versions of yourself and some of that higher thinking and way of being. And a lot of times that has to do with blockages here in the heart space. So that's what we're going to talk about today. So the heart center, the energy center, is obviously right at the center of the chest, right over the heart. It is the center of love, of compassion, of emotional balance, of connection with others and with ourselves, our ability to receive connection and love from others as well as to give it. The color of this energy center is a bright green, and the element that is connected to this energy is air. So this also connects with our breath, representing breath. It connects with openness, with movement. The way that air moves through the world is the same sensation that we get when we think about the heart chakra and the emotions that are there. So you'll find love, you'll find compassion, you'll find empathy, you'll find forgiveness here, and you'll also find grief, you'll find sadness, and you'll find vulnerability. This is the place that we want to be all soft and squishy and vulnerable and emotional within reason and within balance. So like I said, this chakra is like a bridge. It connects your earthly self to your spiritual self. It connects your lower chakras like your desire, your personal power, your survival instincts, and transmutes them into higher feelings like unconditional love, compassion, empathy, forgiveness, all of that. So the convergence of the two is that sweet spot, that balanced spot right where you want to be. And it also bridges the space between human connection, that kind of need to be part of a tribe, to belong, and divine connection, that feeling of oneness with everything and that you already belong because you have divinity inside of you. It's that ability to connect with that unconditional love of that creative energy, that creative source. And it's also the place where when you experience more of these primal desires or need to assert power or anything like that that is in the lower energy centers, it is doing that with love, doing it with compassion, kind of that higher consciousness experience of those more primal emotions. So it's learning how to express anger or frustration in love. It's learning how to express intimacy, not just from a place of desire and pleasure and sexual urge, but also from a place of compassion and deep care for the person. It brings a higher level of thinking, a higher level of consciousness, and a higher energy level into some of those more primal feelings and emotions. So again, I will say that this is important because we are having a physical experience. Whether you want to be or not, at some point you agreed to come here for a physical experience. So your spirit, your energy is in your body for a reason. And part of that is to experience those more primal, carnal aspects of living in this three-dimensional reality. And another part of that is to learn how to transmute and change those instincts and those thoughts and those fears and feelings into that of higher consciousness, into something that is filled with love. When you make a statement like love conquers all, this is what we're talking about. We're talking about not ignoring those quote unquote lower emotional experiences, but rather changing them and infusing them with love, infusing them with compassion and a level of consciousness above just animalistic nature. And the more we evolve as humans, the higher the consciousness on the planet and the frequency of the planet, the more we are able to do this and to live in that perfect harmony, that beautiful balance right here in the heart between not ignoring and pushing away those sometimes scary or difficult emotions, but rather feeling them with that higher level of consciousness and infusing that into the experience. So that's kind of the goal here. So I know when we talked about the sacral energy center right below the belly button, just as a reminder, that is one of the centers of emotions as well. But I would categorize these emotions as more primal. They're instinctual feelings. They're more fundamental. They're desire, their passion, their sensuality. It's the drive for pleasure. And all of that is a very carnal energy. It's very visceral. The heart emotions are a little bit lighter, a little bit brighter. You could say they're almost more refined. They are softer, like love, compassion, empathy, forgiveness. Again, the things that are really infused with that higher level of consciousness and are also focused on relational depth rather than just pleasure. Okay? So let's talk here about some of the emotional aspects of the heart. Right? We've talked about love, compassion, empathy, grief, forgiveness, sadness. We're going to kind of jump into these on a deeper level and break them down for you. So over time, what can happen when we experience difficult situations or trauma is that pain and that experience can cause many of us to build something called a heart wall or a heart shield. And it's essentially an emotional shield that is literally an energetic object that I come into contact with in people's energy when I'm working through the heart space. And this shield, this wall, starts to protect us from further hurt. I mean, if you think about a child, how sensitive they are, how vulnerable and open they are, and willing to be themselves without thinking twice about it. Part of that is this soft squishiness right here in the heart that is allowing for that flow of energy through there. But each time that we're hurt or embarrassed or sad or grieving or not accepted, we start to build up this survival mechanism, this block that protects us from those hurtful experiences. But the problem is, when we build that up for protection from pain, it also stops us from receiving love and giving love at the greatest level. It stops us from being able to open up and be vulnerable and be fully ourselves. And remember, we've talked about before, the highest vibrational emotion is authenticity, even higher than love. Being yourself is more high vibrational than being in love or in gratitude or in joy. Being yourself, being authentic. And part of being authentic has to do with allowing people to see you, to see your emotions, and allowing yourself the possibility of being hurt. Now, most of us don't want to be hurt. Most of us don't want to experience pain. And so 99% of us, if not 100%, have built up some kind of barrier and some kind of protection at different points in our life that is protecting that softness, that jelly in the middle of our heart. These survival patterns can start to shape how we interact with the world. They can keep us emotionally distant. So if you feel like you have trouble really fully connecting with people, if you're afraid to trust people, if you're overly guarded around certain people, all of that has to do with the walls we've built up in this space. And some of these have been there for years and years. And to be honest, some of them have even come through feeling unwanted in the womb or at conception or before conception, your mother or your father having these walls. Some of you may have come into the world to break down your parents' walls. You came in and you were warm and loving and open and vulnerable and squishy, and they were hardened and closed off. And you, being you as the little child that you were, started to heal their hearts and break down their walls and help them to be soft and open again, which I think is one of the joys of having children. I don't have any, but from an outside perspective, what I've observed is that is one of the things, is learning to love yourself again. And then some of you maybe came into the world feeling guarded because you weren't in a safe space or you felt unwanted right away, and you put up that first block. And then once you put up that first block, it's easier and easier to just keep building until you've built this entire fortress around yourself, around your heart. And so many of you, your healing process is going to start here. It's going to start with taking down that wall brick by brick, stone by stone, emotion by emotion, until you are fully able to access what is in there. And what is in there is probably pain and sadness and grief and loneliness and some of those really hurtful feelings. And this is the place in our body where we decide whether we love ourselves or where we decide if we hate ourselves. You know, in the solar plexus, we might feel powerless. In the sacral, we might feel unworthy. In the root, we might feel unsafe. But here is where we feel unlovable. Here is where we feel the culmination of all of those lower things, and we start to hate ourselves. And all of that shapes how we interact with the world, and because of that, what we receive back. So remember, the heart, I know I've talked about this before, but out of all of the electromagnetic fields in our body, each organ has its own electromagnetic field that it puts off. Our body is electric. Our heart is electric. It's why when someone is unconscious and their heart stops beating, we electrocute them, essentially. Because that heart is running on an electric current, first and foremost. And the heart space puts out the greatest electromagnetic field of all of our organs, even more so than our brain. Even though we do a lot of work with the brain and brain scans and how we think and all of this stuff, our emotional space, our heart space, puts out a stronger signal. So that means what we feel in our heart, what we experience emotionally, is stronger than what we think. So our beliefs, our subconscious beliefs, are informing those emotions, and that's what we're putting out into the world. And when we put out that energy into the world, we will attract like energy. If you want more information on that, go and listen to my podcast episode about how energy healing works, or the subconscious mind. So if we're attracting what we put out, then it's going to be so important to feel the things that we want to attract, right? And if our heart is guarded, if there's a wall up, we're not going to be attracting anything. Or if we are, we're going to be attracting things from the mind or from the gut or from some of those lower energy centers because the heart is blocked off. So if our heart is blocked off, the signal's not strong, it's not going out. As much as we're putting love and gratitude and all of that out into the universe, if we've got this heart wall, we're afraid to be seen, we're afraid to be vulnerable, we're afraid to love and receive love and be hurt, then the mind is the driving force. The brain is that next electromagnetic signal that we're putting out into the world, which means your thoughts are creating your reality. And that's a lot of pressure. To get your thoughts under control that much, wouldn't you rather just be able to live in love and gratitude and have that be enough? And you can, if this wall comes down. So that's the first thing that has to happen here when we are looking at this heart space. Now, the wall is really made up of really intense emotions and emotional energies most of the time. Like I said, sometimes they can be inherited, sometimes they can be from the womb, sometimes they can be from different experiences in your life. When you experience a difficult situation or a trauma or a big event that was shocking to you or difficult, sometimes what happens is your body is in survival mode in that moment. And you've got your adrenaline pumping and you've got hormones going on in your bloodstream that do not allow you to process some difficult emotions. So after an experience where you feel in survival mode, where you feel like your blood is pumping, it's really important to then go and do whatever you need to do to process the emotional aspect of that. Because it's not possible to do it typically during the event or the trauma. Because of that, most people will not go or don't know how to go and process their emotions after some big experience. Because of that, that energy of that emotion gets trapped in your system. And that's what starts to build this wall and makes it higher and higher. So let's talk about some of these emotions, what are held here, what is released here, and how to kind of work with them. One of the main emotions that exists in this space is grief. Grief is one that changes with time, but it has to be felt, it has to be experienced, and it has to be moved through your system. Sometimes grief is suppressed because it feels embarrassing or it feels like too much for you, or you don't know how to process it, or maybe you don't have someone to process with. So a lot of times I find grief trapped in this area in the body. And grief typically stems from the loss of something, right? The loss of a loved one, maybe the death of a loved one, the loss of a relationship that you really cared about, that you were really invested in, the loss of a dream, something you wanted to do in your life, someone you wanted to be, or even the loss of parts of yourself. And that can be by choice, or that could be parts that you feel were taken from you or stolen from you, like your innocence and that kind of thing. Another one of the emotions that lives here is depression. Now, a lot of times grief and depression and sadness all kind of go hand in hand, and they typically come together. You usually don't experience depression on its own. It's not out of nowhere. Typically, there's some kind of loss or event that causes you to move into a depressive state, and then you're just continuously digging that hole deeper and deeper and deeper until you can start to find a way out of it. So depression is here, and it causes numbness, it causes that disconnection from love and joy, and it really sits a lot of times with that sadness. Again, sometimes the sadness is felt, and sometimes the sadness is you're numb to it. Now, I'll say too that a lot of times this sadness and depression both can be either generational and come from a family member, or a pattern that a family member had and then you inherited, or it can be caused by a broken relationship, like with that of a parent or someone that you really loved and cared about, or it can be a feeling of abandonment as a child. There are a lot of childhood wounds here in this part of the energy body that start to build that heart wall and eventually lead to that numbness and that depression. So if you have a lot of feelings of betrayal or abandonment or any of that kind of stuff, and it's built up this shield around your heart out of protection, then a lot of times that is what leads to the depression. That is what leads to that feeling of numbness or an inability to connect. And a lot of times if you had a parent, either a mother or a father, that wasn't able to connect with you, or for some reason didn't want to, or they were not vulnerable themselves, especially in that love, empathy, connection, sensitivity part of a relationship, then a lot of times that will show up here as well. Something else that shows up in this area that a lot of people like to ignore, pretend doesn't exist, or don't realize exists in their system is hatred. And hatred is really suppressed a lot of times because most people are afraid to confront it. Many people were told hate is a strong word, don't say you hate something, and that it's bad to hate and all of this. The thing with hate is that typically underneath hate, it's fear. It's fear, it's jealousy, it's a sense of powerlessness. A lot of times there is something underneath all of it. And as I said, this is the place in the body where that self-hatred really is prominent. And when we don't love ourselves, when we have any kind of hatred for ourselves, even if it is because of fear or something underneath it, we cut ourselves off subconsciously or sometimes intentionally from actually connecting with people. When you're living in a space of hatred, self-hatred, you don't want to be seen by others. You don't want to be loved by others. Even if you say you do or consciously you think you want to connect with people, filling your own cup first and learning to love yourself first is the most important aspect here. It's why there are so many stories of people who were looking for their partner for years and years, and they were dating all of these horrible people, and then they decide, I'm done with dating, I'm taking a break, I'm just going to heal myself or work on my own self-healing and self-love. And when they start to actually love and care for themselves enough that they don't even feel like they need a partner, that's when the person shows up. And the reason is not just because you've broken down some of that heart wall so that your vulnerability and your truth is shining through, and also you're putting that emotional connection and that vibration out into the world. Yes, that is true. But also, when you love yourself, you radiate that authenticity because you're not afraid of being seen. You're not afraid of people judging you and criticizing you. You're not afraid of pain and being hurt by someone because you recognize and you realize that you are the most love you could ever receive, and that that divine love is inside of you. That spark of creation and divinity lives inside of you. And when you recognize that, everything outside doesn't matter as much, everything outside of yourself. So if you're having trouble connecting, you're having trouble reaching out, giving love, receiving love, all of that, give it to yourself first. Break down those walls first. What is keeping you from really seeing yourself, from really loving yourself? And this is where some of that shadow work or whatever comes in, where you begin to love all of the parts of yourself and recognize why they're there and how they got there, and that it's all beautiful and all part of this experience of living. And then you begin to integrate some of those parts into the wholeness of you, making yourself one whole being with light and dark, and releasing things that aren't you, that aren't part of you, and stepping into the fullness of who you are, your truest self. And you can only do that through this love for yourself. And self-love is such a process. There are many, many people I know that this took years. And a lot of people really hate themselves. And they don't want to admit it, or they don't realize. And then there are people that will literally stand there and look in the mirror and say, I hate myself. And so that's the place to begin. Learning to love yourself and look at yourself and look at the dark parts of you and the beautiful parts of you and kind of start to unravel it all. And that's what releasing hate is. It's allowing yourself to feel that because it's there for a reason, and what's underneath it and why. What are the deeper layers to it? What is fueling that hatred? And when you start to work with those fears, the lack of control, then you start to understand what your survival patterns are, how you work, and you can begin to actually free up this space. Another common pattern in this area is that many people overextend themselves. And a lot of times this is behavior that you are doing because you want to be loved, right? You become a people pleaser or a doormat, or you're consistently putting other people's needs before your own. I mean, not only does this lead to burnout and resentment and just emotional depletion, but it also is usually under a mask. The mask is the people pleasing. The mask is that you care for other people. But typically, it's coming out of a place of not feeling good enough, of not loving yourself truly, and just wanting validation and hoping that even if someone doesn't tell you, oh, you did a good job because you helped or you cared for that person or did that thing, a lot of times it's your self-validation. It's that feeling of, I feel so good about myself now because I helped that person or I did that. And it's kind of like that martyr feeling, like I am such a good person because I did X, Y, and Z, even though you didn't have the capacity to do it, even though it was killing you to do it, even though you said yes when you really meant no internally, when your body felt a no, but you said yes anyway because you wanted to be liked, because you wanted to be validated, because you wanted to be loved. And so this is another place in the body where setting boundaries is a really important part of keeping this space in balance, not imbalanced. I know we hear this all the time, but are you really doing it? It's that concept of putting on your own oxygen mask before you help others. Are you really putting on that oxygen mask for yourself and breathing and allowing yourself that space before you're stepping out and helping others and loving other people, quote unquote, loving other people? Because is that real love if you're looking for validation, even if the validation is from yourself? Love that has an agenda is not love. Think about that for a minute. Think about your relationships. Think about everything you do in your life where you say you love people. Do you really love them, or is there something underneath it? Is there some other motive? Even if the motive is your own self-validation, feeling like a good person. I remember getting so frustrated when I was a part of Christianity because there was such a goal and a push to love people so that they would want to be a Christian. And it's not just that religion, it's many religions, it's all over the place. If you are loving someone for the purpose of an end result, you are not loving them. That is not love. If you're loving yourself for the purpose of an end result, that's not love. Real, true, deep love and compassion is loving someone no matter what. It's loving them, period. It's loving all of the parts of them. It's loving them no matter if they mess up or if they hurt you. It's loving them if they wrong you. And it's forgiving over and over and over again. Now, am I telling you to remain in an abusive or a difficult or dangerous situation? No, that's not what I mean here. It is loving yourself, to know yourself and to have boundaries for yourself, and then to go outward from there, to know what situations aren't good for you, and to love deeply with no motive or agenda. And you really can't love people until you love yourself. So loving yourself always becomes the first step. And how do you begin to love yourself? How do you start to do that? Well, part of it is recognizing that spark of divinity within you. Learning to love and recognize the oneness of everything, that connection with the divine, and why we are here in these bodies, experiencing all of this, the pain, the joy, and everything in between. So let's talk now about the ooey gooey goodness of the heart. It's the place where you do experience that love, that empathy, and gratitude and presence. When we align our emotions, when we align our heart with love, with joy, with gratitude, it allows this space to open up. It allows those walls to come down and to really see our life and our experience from a different perspective. And this is why when you're in that space of gratefulness and when you're living in the present moment, the acceptance of what is right now, right here, right now, this is why you can manifest from the heart space. Because the shields are down, the walls are down, what you're putting out into the world is that high vibration of gratefulness and love and full acceptance of what is. And that is when you're in alignment and things start coming to you. Things you've asked for years. And all you have to do is be able to receive, to hold out your hands and be open to receiving it. The back of the body here is the place in our energy where we receive. So we receive love, we receive from the universe, and we receive from other people. So sometimes that back part of the energy center might be shut down and maybe the front is wide open. So you're giving, maybe like overly vulnerable, and then you're not able to receive love and help and support, and you feel like nobody, wants to love you, or you're like too emotional to love, or overly sensitive and overly vulnerable, and because of that people don't want to love you. A lot of times that is just that back kind of shut down. And again, it's kind of another survival pattern, another protective mechanism that allows you to believe that you're safe from that connection with people. So when you're living in this presence, this gratitude, this love and joy and peace, all of this right here, this is when you feel calm and aligned and natural. Like it feels natural. It feels like you're in flow. I don't want to say it feels easy because life isn't easy, but it is this ability to kind of be adaptable and transmute the energy when it comes through. It's that presence and that openness that allows you to be abundant and to just go with the flow of everything the universe is giving you. I want to go back really quickly to the part about people pleasing as well and kind of overextending yourself and caretaking. Something else that I wanted to mention here is that this is not just on a one-on-one level. This is not just caretaking for your family or your friends or your acquaintances or your coworkers or whatever. This can also be on a world level. So if you are a person who is really affected by the news, by the things going on a global scale, all of that sits here in the heart space as well. And so a lot of times we unnecessarily immerse ourselves in some of those issues and some of that media and all of that when there are extreme things going on. And that is really affecting this heart space. What I want to say to that is that some of you are like, well, yeah, I want to know what's happening. I want to be involved. I want to do something. I feel bad. I don't want our world to be the way that it is. And all of that is beautiful and great. And you are an activist because not everyone feels like that. So if you feel those things deeply, then you are the type of person that doesn't need to just watch it on TV. You need to go out and do the things that will make a difference. If you can't fly halfway across the world to go be there in person and donate your help and resources, then what can you do in your local community to further the causes that you care about? We need more people who are actively serving and working toward the world that they want to see rather than just screaming about it on social media and reposting videos on social media. Some of that is great for awareness, but there comes a point where you're just consuming and consuming and consuming all of this energy around that, and you feel like you're helping because you're taking it on energetically, but you're never processing that through by going out and volunteering and putting your money somewhere and doing something about it. And you're just screaming into the void by reposting all of these things that are really truly breaking your heart, but they're sitting in your energy. So if you're feeling anxious, if you're feeling depressed, if you're feeling sad or grieving about the state of the world right now, where can you funnel that energy? And if you can't, or you don't want to, or you feel like that's not me to do that, then maybe it's time to check yourself on how much of that you're consuming. Maybe your gifts and resources could be utilized in a different way to help raise the consciousness of the planet in another way. For example, I care about all of that. Everything that's going on politically and socially and globally right now is a big mess. And I care. And I don't want it to be that way. But that is not my skill set. My skill set is helping people to heal one-on-one, to fix their connection with the Creator, to help them to connect to themselves, love God, and love others. And by doing that, some of those people will go out and be the change makers, the lawmakers, and the people who are the activists. But I am not an activist in that way. So if you know that you're not, don't be consuming that information that way. Don't be taking it on and holding it just in your system and not knowing what to do with it and then getting all depressed about it. You've got to have boundaries for yourself in that way too. And also, many of you who are listening to me are empaths, right? You take on the energy of other people, unintentionally or intentionally, doesn't matter. And so this goes for that too. These boundaries that you're setting up for yourself are like protective boundaries so that you're not taking on other people's energy when you don't mean to, or if you don't know how to process it, and you're energetically just kind of giving it right back to them. Because if you are sensitive, if you are an empath, people will unintentionally suck your energy or give you theirs. And we don't want either of those things happening. So if you are one of those people, these boundaries are really, really important to protect your energy, to protect your heart space, and to select very intentionally who you're sharing certain things with, who you're vulnerable with, and what level of vulnerability you have. Now, this is not connecting. This is not having a heart wall or a heart shield. This is just boundaries. This is just protecting yourself in a way that is actually beneficial. Because when you protect yourself in this way, when you learn how to remain soft and empathetic, but only in the instances and the situations where you allow it, then you have the capacity to actually utilize your gifts of empathy and sensitivity. Otherwise, you're drained, you're depressed, you're sad, and you don't know how to function. So I think at some point I may even just create a little meditation or hypnosis or something for those of you that are empaths specifically, because it's a skill that you have to build, this protecting your energy thing. And it comes over time. The first step is just realizing that that's what's happening, that you're taking on other people's energy and your body is overwhelmed by it. So now let's talk about the physical aspects of the heart, because remember, every energy center is connected to a physical component within the body. So this is where your cardiovascular health comes from, your lungs, your immune system is all tied into the heart chakra. So imbalances can show up as tightness in the chest, breathing problems, immune system problems, heart disease, stress. A lot of times stress will just constrict this heart area and make it so painful and heavy and intense. It's like the pressure of the stress really causes physical symptoms here. So if you have any kind of heart issues, any kind of breathing issues, asthma, or anything like that, a lot of it can be connected to the health of your heart energy center. It also might manifest physically in the arms and the hands. We'll talk about the hands a little bit later in another episode, but the hands are kind of your ability to reach out and connect with others, your extension of your heart, more or less. So if you're having pain in the wrists, in the fingers, if you're having shoulder pain, sometimes that is you carrying the weight of the world or just some kind of blockage affecting your ability to truly connect with the world around you. Now let's discuss what a balanced heart chakra looks like and what an underactive and overactive heart chakra will look like. So if your heart energy center is underactive, you may feel isolated, you may feel numb or emotionally cold, like you can't connect, you can't reach out, unable to just connect with others on any level. You might also really struggle with jealousy. You might have trouble forgiving people or overlooking things, like you might hold grudges really easily or hold resentment or bitterness. All of that here in the heart is keeping you from truly reaching out and truly having that connection and being vulnerable. So again, on a physical level, if your heart center is underactive, you might have low blood pressure. You might also have high blood pressure, tightness, heaviness in the chest, heart palpitations. You might have shortness of breath, like difficulty breathing, asthma, even shallow breathing or discomfort when you're breathing. You might also get colds or infections a lot, especially colds. If you're a person who's always getting sick every other weekend or whatever it is, a lot of times that has to do with a weak immune response. But also right behind the heart is the thymus gland, and that has to do with your immunity. So it's all in this area. And in fact, I should have mentioned before, the hormone that is connected with this heart chakra is oxytocin. And oxytocin is what's released when you bond, when you connect with other people, when you hug, when you're touching, when you have intimate interactions. And this oxytocin is actually beneficial on a physical level to your cardiovascular system, to your stress reduction. So if you're a cold, closed off person, chances are you're not hugging people, you're not touching people, you're not getting that hormonal release that is helping to reduce your blood pressure, that is reducing inflammation and stress levels and all of that within the body. Oxytocin also really decreases cortisol, which is that stress hormone. So the more hugs you get, the calmer you should feel. I am a very physical touch-centered person, so I am a little biased here, but I will say there are a lot of studies that have been done on emotional well-being and human connection, and this is crazy. So you should be getting 4 hugs a day. That's just for survival. Some of you aren't getting 4 hugs a day. So how are you doing? Some of you are not touchy-feely people, but you still need your hugs. So 4 hugs a day for survival, 8 hugs a day for maintenance, 8, and 12 hugs a day for growth. I mean, I am here for that, but I know some of you aren't. So that might be something to actually look at. Like if you feel that you don't want to touch people and you don't want to hug them, I mean, a lot of people who feel that way have some sort of physical trauma that has happened to them. So some of that are pieces to be unraveled within this heart space, within the heart wall. And when you're looking at whether your heart center is underactive or overactive. I should say also that to release the oxytocin, a hug needs to last 20 seconds or longer. I'm just so happy about this because you have no idea how much I love hugging people. It just makes me so happy. So yeah, all of that is something to look at if you feel like your heart center is underactive. Now, let's talk about an overactive heart chakra. So an overactive energy center here is going to be that energy is too concentrated and you might have an excessive focus on your emotional needs and really not be able to balance your emotions. You are probably overextending yourself. Maybe you're very codependent with one or more people, which basically means that you can't function without someone else's validation and their input on your life and the interaction with them. A lot of times too, these are the people that will neglect their own needs and have no boundaries whatsoever. You're just constantly giving too much and also oversharing. Just being overly vulnerable to the point that it's not healthy for you and it actually may even be dangerous to you, especially in the world that we live in where we're posting everything on social media and it's very accessible to find someone's address and where they live and all of that kind of stuff. Sometimes being overly vulnerable can put you in dangerous situations like that. The other thing I'll say is that when it comes to relationships, especially for women, a lot of times, if you're overly vulnerable, it attracts a certain type of partner or person that wants to feed off of that vulnerability of maybe some of your weaknesses and the things that you share about that really aren't for everyone to hear. It also may put you in situations where you are uncomfortable because, for instance, I used to be very, very open and vulnerable with everyone I met. And I had a lot of men that thought because I was open and vulnerable, I was into them. And I wasn't into any of them. But there just are not a lot of people that are overly vulnerable or even vulnerable at all and open and authentic. So if you're really open, people will be attracted to you like moths to a flame. But it's almost kind of like this weird infatuation where they may think that you love them or they may think that you are open and vulnerable because you have some interest in them or that kind of thing. So that is another indication if you're having that problem, like in general with people, you may have an overactive heart center. Now, sometimes I will say, even though my heart center is more balanced now, it still happens when I'm fully in my authenticity and myself. And that's because you're living in your light and you're living in alignment. And most people aren't doing that either. So people do find that attractive and they do feel drawn to that. And occasionally it will surprise them to the point that they will think that you're interested in them because you are just being authentic. And when we are comfortable around people, we feel better to be authentic, and it makes them feel good that we don't have any walls up and that kind of thing. So sometimes especially within the dating world, but just sometimes even in friendships, people can get the wrong idea when you are overly vulnerable or too open. So you kind of just have to gauge, that if you are a person who is very easily open and vulnerable. So physically then, if you have an overactive center, you might experience heart palpitations, like a racing heart, especially in stressful or emotional situations. You might hyperventilate or have a breathing pattern that sometimes like leads to dizziness, or a breathing pattern that leads to anxiety. Your circulation might be overactive, so you might get flushed cheeks or have hot flashes, flushed skin. And then you might feel tension in the chest, like you're carrying emotional weight or responsibility. The other thing is you will probably feel really exhausted or drained because you're constantly giving out your energy, giving, and you're not really replenishing it. So sometimes you'll just be totally burnt out. All right, and then because I have so many of my creatives in here, I just want to talk about the heart chakra for creatives and artists as well. Of course, most of us are empathetic, sensitive, very vulnerable, emotionally vulnerable people. So this may be a really accessible place for you, or it might not, and you might have a mask here. And this mask is not allowing you to really create on that authentic level, to really be the artist or performer that you know you are deep down. And that's that protective barrier trying to keep you from being seen and trying to keep you from being hurt. So you might feel like a fear of rejection or struggle with fully expressing yourself, or you might feel disconnected from your creative work. Like maybe you make something and you're not even sure if you like it, or you don't really know how the world might perceive it. Sometimes that can be a blocked heart energy center here. If it's balanced, you're creating from a place of love, you're creating from emotional authenticity. So that's whatever you're feeling, if you are feeling hate, if you are feeling fear, if you're feeling sadness and grief, but also if you're feeling love and joy and excitement. There are not enough artists who create out of feeling love, joy, excitement, and some of those higher vibrational emotions. So looking at that as well, are you in that emotionally addictive patterning that we've talked about before? Typically that lies in that sacral energy center, but it's something to look at up here as well, especially in regards to grief and sadness and depression. If you're in that loop of grief and sadness and you can't seem to get out of it after an extended amount of time, and everything you're making is a sad song or whatever it may be, and you're not able to move through it and past it, there is some kind of emotional addiction there going on. I also want to say that when we're creating, we are putting our energy out into the world. We are extending our heart, our emotions, our own experience and perception of this reality. We're extending all of that to other people. We're putting it out there. And when people receive it, when people experience it, so say you're a singer on stage, you're singing, and people are in the audience now experiencing the emotion that's coming through you. They're experiencing the pain or the grief or the love or whatever it is as you're emoting, as you are creating. That audience then is going to start emoting that same frequency, that same energy, and they're going to give it back to you. And so it kind of becomes this feedback loop. And if you are creating authentically, you will go on a journey together with the person. And it can be with anything. It can be with artwork. It can be with comedy. It can be with writing. It can be with a film that you make. It can be with acting. It can be with anything. You're going on this journey together emotionally. And if you allow yourself through that process, they're going to feed that energy and you're going to feed it back. And it's going to keep moving in that way until you both resolve the emotion that you're working through together. And that is the beauty of art and experiencing art, especially live art. especially when you go to a concert or go to the theater. This is what you're experiencing. This is why it feels so magical, because you're experiencing that exchange of energy and that feedback loop. It can happen on screen as well. It's just a little more one-sided because the actor or whoever is not experiencing it simultaneously at the same time, but it is still happening. So that's just something to think about. Like, as you're authentically expressing yourself within your art, people are receiving that. There is an exchange, an energetic exchange that is happening. And then there's also an energetic exchange that happens between you and your art, which is so wild, but everything is energy, right? And sometimes your creations can even take on almost an energy or a presence of their own. And sometimes you may even feel like they were divinely inspired and you don't even know where the idea came from. And then all of a sudden you were creating it. And it's almost like it's yours, but it's not even yours, you know? And you even create a feedback loop with that object, with that piece, with that artwork, where you are giving energy to it and it is returning that energetic experience. So I just think that's kind of fun and interesting and something to be mindful of and just play with and be curious about as you are in creation mode and really in kind of that vibe where things just flow. This is coming from that heart space. This is coming from that ability to open yourself and bare your soul. All right, so let's talk about what we do to get all of this balanced. Every single person you talk to will say, keep a gratitude journal. And honestly, it's not a bad idea. I just really hate it. Talking about hate, I just can't stand doing a gratitude journal. However, there are ways to do it. Some of you love writing, so you could get the 5-minute gratitude journal and do that. What I like to do is when I wake up in the morning and at night, I like to think about the things that I'm grateful for and feel grateful for them, like really experience that feeling. I try to do it in the morning when I first wake up, before I look at my phone and everything, and I try to do it at night when I'm falling asleep. Sometimes even if I can't fall asleep right away, I will just go through all the things in my day, my week that I'm really grateful for. Everybody does it differently. You can look in the mirror and say things you're grateful for. You can write it out. You can keep a running list on your phone. What that does is it just keeps you in that state of presence. And that gratefulness, again, is one of those emotions that is more high vibrational, and it starts to break down those barriers in your heart space. I do really think if you have a heart shield or wall, it is helpful to get with an energy healer of some kind to help you work through that. A therapist can also help you work through that to some extent, especially a therapist who does like EMDR or something like that. Breath work is another really great way to open the heart space, to release that emotional tension. Sometimes breath work is really helpful when you feel like you need to cry or when you feel super stressed out and overwhelmed, but you haven't cried or you don't know how to not feel overwhelmed. Breath work will really start to get those things moving, and usually there will be tears and emotional release if you're in that state. Something else that I really love for the heart space especially is connecting to art. And I know we kind of just talked about this with the feedback loop kind of deal, but I think watching a movie where you know you're going to cry, or watching a movie that you know is going to make you feel warm and fuzzy and happy, or watching a movie that's going to allow you to release some of that hatred or grief or sadness, or watching a movie that it's really fun, that's going to help move you through that depression. I mean, it doesn't all have to be a movie. Those are just some examples, but it could be music. Music is a fantastic way to put yourself into a state different than the one you were in previously. You could go see theater, you could see a play, you could write a song, you could read poetry or write poetry, you could paint, you could go to an art gallery and look at artwork. I think art in general helps us to process our emotions and to work through things, but especially if we do it intentionally and especially when we're working in the heart space. It just is so connected. And then, of course, doing self-care practices. I have a podcast episode from much earlier that talks about self-love and self-care, and I also have a self-love hypnosis. So you could do something like that where you're really focusing on forgiving yourself, releasing some of those negative thoughts about yourself, some of the pain and embarrassment and shame that you feel about yourself, and moving into that space of love. So sometimes meditation will help you to do that, and hypnosis, and really just focusing on some of those self-care elements can start to move you in that direction of truly loving yourself. So where are you in all of this? What emotions do you feel like you're holding in your heart right now? Do you have hate? Do you have grief? Do you have sadness or depression that's unresolved? And is there something underneath that? Some reason that you've been protecting yourself? Do you feel like you can connect with other people? Do you feel like you have compassion, true love for other people? Or is there some motive underneath it? And how would your life change if you allowed yourself to feel more love, to experience more love? You might experience hurt and love. Typically, when we open ourselves up to experience love, we also experience pain. But would that enhance your life? Would that make your life richer than living in the numbness, than living in the cold and dark and hardened space that you're in? And then maybe you're really open. Where do you need to set stronger boundaries to really protect your heart, to protect your energy, to keep yourself safe from burnout and from leeches? And how would your art, how would your creativity change if you began to truly love yourself and feel okay being seen? What could you do in life? How far could you go if you were okay being seen? I mean, obviously, I want you to think about that for yourself, but from my experience, even if you experience pain and hurt, the love and the joy and the fullness of life outweighs all of that. And if you can learn to just witness the pain and the experience and allow it to move through and allow it for growth and recognize that it's for change and to make you stronger and to make you more expanded and more conscious, if you can recognize that even while it's happening, life becomes mysterious. Life becomes like a treasure hunt. It becomes fun. It becomes something that you really enjoy. When we hide, when we protect ourselves, when we just want to stay hidden away because of the fear of pain, we are losing out on the greatest joys of being alive. So if this is you, just start small. Start with some small heart healing practices. Maybe see a healer. And if you're trying to manifest things in your life, if you're trying to move into something greater than what's going on right now, this is going to be one of the places to start. When you align yourself here, you're fully in alignment and able to connect both the spiritual and the physical part of you, and this is where life happens. If you are looking for one-on-one help with that, please reach out to me. I am more than happy to set up a consultation with you and we can talk about how I can help. If one-on-one is not your thing, but you're still interested in meditations every week and a healing toolbox that you have access to forever, you are welcome to join my membership. It's $7.77 for the month. You get a healing tool every single week. Last week, I dropped a timeline jumping meditation. This week, I don't know what I'm going to give you yet, but I know it's going to be good. So check that out. There's also a community of other people who are healing and growing spiritually in there. And next week, we are going to be talking all about the throat chakra and voicing your truth. Thank you so much for being here. I love you all, and I hope you have a wonderful day. I'll talk to you soon.